Everybody, peace. Welcome to the Sorry to Bother You College Football Show. Wherever or however you're listening, we're so grateful to have you here with us. As you guys know, I'm your host, Casuan, and this may very well be the most action-packed, jam-packed show we've done all season. Listen, guys, we've been covering college football all season, starting from week 1 all the way through conference championship weekend. And now we've been covering bowl season, and now we're getting to the penultimate moment of college football in its season, and that's the New Year's Six Bowls. And everything that we've discussed, everything we've talked about, everything we've covered, everything we've analyzed has led up to this moment right here. And, we've got all the coverage for you guys. We're going to cover it. We're going to cover each game. We're not going to do the Cotton Bowl. Obviously, the Cotton Bowl was yesterday, but we're going to cover every game. The Peach Bowl with Georgia and Florida State. The Rose Bowl with Michigan and Alabama. The Sugar Bowl with Washington and Texas, as well as the Chick-fil-A Bowl with Ole Miss and Penn State. And we're not going to waste any time, guys. We're going to go ahead and get right into it. But before we get started, if you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button as well, so you guys can stay up to date on all of our latest content. Be sure to follow us on Patreon as well. You can do so by going to patreon.com, clicking on the search bar, and typing in Sorry to Bother You Show. That way you can get access to all of our exclusive content that we post daily. And if you'd like to support our network and our company, you can do so by following the link in the ticker below. It's streamelements.com/sorrytobotheryoushow/tip. Once again, it's streamelements.com/sorrytobotheryoushow/tip. None of this is possible without you guys, the fans, so we're so grateful and honored for all the love and support that you show us, and it's a blessing to have this platform. So, with that being said, guys, let's go ahead and get right into it. Let's start with the Peach Bowl, shall we? Number 6, Georgia, going up against number 4, Florida State. A lot of controversy surrounding this bowl game due to, obviously, Florida State being left out of the college football playoff and instead being replaced by Alabama, despite Florida State going undefeated and winning the ACC championship. We know Georgia was ranked number 1 all season, then lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game, which led to them being dropped out of the top 4 all the way down to number 6. And listen, we discussed that those rankings and that decision made by the College Football Playoff Committee about a month ago, and I discussed that the only issue I had is that there's no way you think Florida isn't better than Alabama, but think that they're better than Georgia. So, in my opinion, I think Florida State should have been ranked lower than Georgia. I think that that Georgia should have been ranked number 5. And forgive me, I know on our graphic right now it says Florida's ranked number 4, so forgive me on that graphic. But we do understand Florida is ranked number 5 right now. However, this would have been a perfect moment for either team, Georgia or Florida State, to show not just the College Football Playoff Committee, but also the country that they're deserving of being in the top 4. And each team can make a legitimate argument that they should have been ranked as one of the 4 best teams in college football. Florida State might have had a better argument than Georgia, but still an argument nonetheless. And this game, just like many of the other bowl games that have been played, are being affected by the transfer portal and frankly the NIL. And I'm not saying that in a negative aspect, in a negative way, but it's more so just an observation. Listen, players today are taking their careers into their own hands, rightfully so, and they are making financial decisions. They're making business decisions. They're making decisions that are best not for the program, but for themselves and their future, and as they should. So we're seeing now that a lot of players, are transferring, going into the transfer portal, which means that they're no longer allowed to play for the program, which means they're no longer available for the bowl games. And so we're not getting an accurate depiction of what these teams are at, at full strength. For example, with this Georgia-Florida State matchup, Georgia, I believe, has over 15 players in the transfer portal, and on top of that, 4 or 5 players that are injured that won't be playing, that might not be playing. So I know Carson Beck will be back. He will be playing in the Peach Bowl. And Matt McConkey, he will be playing despite him being hurt. My sources told me that he will be playing. And Brock Bowers, that I'm unsure of. I know Brock Bowers will likely be going into the draft, declaring for the NFL draft, and he is also dealing with an injury. I'm unsure if he'll be playing. But, on top of that, like I said, 15 players in the transfer portal for Georgia. We're not going to get to see Georgia at full strength, but we're not going to get to see Florida State at full strength either. If I'm not mistaken, Florida State is only going to have 53 active players on their roster, including scholarship and walk-ons. So Florida State has a bevy number of players going into the transfer portal. As you guys know, their backup quarterback has entered the transfer portal by many surprised by that, and now they're down to their third string quarterback again. So we're not going to get to see this game at max talent and at max capacity, max potential for both of these teams. And, it shows that neither team really wants to be there. And this is a reflection of, both teams still recovering from the decision made by the College Football Playoff Committee. And also, something that hasn't been talked about, surprisingly, is the impact of the SEC and the Big Ten expanding their conferences and what effect that's having on the transfer portal. So what we see is, like we said, I think there's about 25 players from Florida State that have entered the transfer portal. And I don't know where those guys are going, but I would not be surprised if over half of those players from Florida State that have entered the transfer portal, I would not be surprised if they're not transferring to a Big Ten school or a SEC school, because what happens now with the format being expanded to 12 teams, I would be confident to say of the 12, 8 or 9 of those teams are going to come from the SEC and the Big Ten. And if your goal is to play for a national championship as a player, you're going to go to a conference that has the best chance of doing that, and that's the SEC and the Big Ten. And just like we have seen as analysts and reporters, fans have seen it, and players have seen that the ACC just frankly doesn't get much respect from the rest of the world in college football. So players are going to be less likely to want to play in that conference. And the ACC could very well fall down the same line that the Pac-12 has fallen, where it just completely dissolves. And I would not be surprised if it goes to that direction, goes down that line. And that's the cause of these players going into the transfer portal. And so with all of those things that are going on, it's having an effect, obviously, on the game itself, the Peach Bowl. So if we go into the game, if we actually look at the game itself, listen. Florida State obviously has had one of the best defenses in all of college football. However, their offense has been much maligned due to Jordan Travis getting hurt. Georgia has been one of the most consistent teams in college football all year. Like I said, their only loss coming against Alabama in the SEC championship game. The key to this game for Florida State is going to be to limit the number of extended drives for Georgia. This is going to be the best team that Florida State has faced all year offensively. And the last thing that Florida State wants to have happen is get into a shootout with Georgia. Florida State is going to have to rely heavily on their defense, particularly their secondary, in terms of playing excellent man coverage and not allowing the receivers for Georgia to get over the top and bust the coverage open. And if the secondary for Florida State can play sound football and sound coverage and not give up the big plays, then that's going to give Florida State an excellent chance to win, because it's going to allow their offense more opportunities to get on the field. I don't believe that Florida State's offense is explosive enough to score in the 30s or even the high 20s. So it's going to have to be a low-scoring game in order for Florida State to be successful. In order for Georgia to be successful, Georgia's going to have to just score. They're going to have to create big plays, especially off the play action pass. We know that the receiving core for Georgia has been explosive all season. Carson Beck's one of the best passers, one of the best quarterbacks in college football. And if he has more time in the pocket to probe the secondary and to scan the field, it's going to lead to big plays for Georgia, and it's going to allow Georgia to bust coverage and to score points. So the key to Georgia is going to be scoring off the play action, establishing the play action, and taking advantage of their drives, turning field goals into touchdowns early and often. And if Georgia can jump out to a big lead early in the first quarter, second quarter, then it will be in their favor. And really, if Georgia can get out to a 2-score lead before halftime, I think the game then can get quite ugly, because then Georgia will likely just attempt to play keep away and run out the clock, because Florida State's not a team that can play from behind, especially with the way their team is set up right now. And that's what I think is going to happen. I think that Georgia's going to get out to a 2-score lead early in the first quarter, second quarter, and then from that point on, Georgia's going to play keep away. And I don't think this game's going to be a high-scoring game, though. I do think that because Georgia's going to get out to such a huge lead early on, it's going to allow them to play keep away and not look to go for the big plays later on. And Florida State's just not going to have a chance to get into a rhythm offensively, and that's going to cause their defense to get tired, and it's going to lead to the defense for Florida State making a couple more mistakes, and that's going to lead to 1 or 2 big plays from Georgia in the air. And so I have Georgia winning this game by a score of 28-14. I wouldn't be surprised if that score jumps down to 28-10. I just don't think this is going to be a high-scoring game. I actually think it's going to be a kind of an ugly game. Actually, I don't think it's going to be an exciting game, or as exciting as a game as people were hoping to see. But it's merely a reflection of the state of college football and where it's going. Drastic changes are being made, and as a reporter, as an analyst, even as a fan, you're either going to be rigid and be an old McGrudgeon and turn away from college football entirely, or are going to be willing to accept the changes and move along with it. And those are really your only 2 options. Listen, to college football of old, where teams and even players were excited to represent their conference during bowl season, those days are done, and we have to accept that. I'm not saying it's good or bad, it just is. But that's my coverage on that game, guys. Let me know what you guys think about the Peach Bowl. Who do you guys think is going to win? Georgia, Florida State? Do you think it's going to be a close game? Do you think it's going to be a blowout? Share your thoughts in the comment section and in the chat room as well. In our next segment, guys, we are going to be discussing another New Year's 6 matchup between Ole Miss and Penn State. So be sure to stick around for that, guys. You are not going to miss it. Be right back. So it's a media company, and we have a podcast, 2 live shows, and clothing apparel attached to us. So the podcast, we release on podcast and Spotify twice a month. And then we have actually 3 live shows on YouTube. So I go YouTube. We have Instagram live shows. Then the clothing apparel. We have shirts and hats that are on the website. 50% of the revenue that we make from that is used to fund cherry drives in the area. So, then we also have a blog post where we cover just some of the work we use. That's probably our smallest branch. We're still trying to try to expand that. Yeah, so we do quite a number of things. It's good business, supposedly. So that is that. And I haven't thought much about it. And we seem great. Go to a coffee shop, chat. Go to a coffee shop, hang out, talk. We're gonna take a break, go to a coffee shop, hang out. And if you want later on, someone else, so you can let's see how good you are in Smash Bros. Yeah, definitely. See that, but before that, that's when we go to the coffee shop, chat, talk a little bit. Or if you want, you can go on a walk at your village, you can stay. Those things are good. We'll try to cut back real quick. But that makes you good. What's your major so far? Alright, that's it. That's the show. And I'll talk to you soon. All right, everybody, welcome back. In case you missed the first segment of our show, we discussed the Peach Bowl matchup between Georgia and Florida State. Like I said in the previous segment, it's not going to be as exciting of a matchup as people were hoping for due to the transfer portal and injuries from both teams. But that game is going to be a reflection and, quite frankly, a microcosm of what the state of college football is currently in right now and where it's heading. I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It just is. And in this segment, guys, we're going to be discussing the Chick-fil-A Bowl between Penn State and Ole Miss. Listen, guys, got an exciting matchup between these two teams from the SEC and from the Big Ten. If you guys remember, early on in the season, I was quite adamant about Penn State being one of the best teams in the country. However, that changed when they lost to Ohio State. I was fooled. I thought that their offense had finally turned a corner under James Franklin, and I thought that they finally had an offense that could support the outstanding defense that they had, and that was really the missing piece that was the piece they were missing for the past couple of years. That was preventing them from being a legitimate national championship contenders. But turns out they still don't have that offense. Offense still lacking, still lackluster, pedestrian to say the least. But their defense is just so phenomenal. They still managed to be ranked in the top 10. They were the third best team in the Big Ten, which is one of the best conferences, obviously, in college football this past season. And what is the saying that we have? What's the phrase that we have said on ad nauseum over the course of this season? Penn State is Notre Dame, and Notre Dame is Penn State. So if you want to see how good Penn State is, just watch Notre Dame play. If you want to see how good Notre Dame is, just watch Penn State play. Those teams are one and the same. And with Ole Miss, listen, Ole Miss is doing a tremendous job in the transfer portal right now. By the way, Lane Kiffin is a recruiting wizard. I don't know what he's doing down there, but I'm not surprised by that, because when he was at FAU, I'll never forget, I have a friend who, I'm not gonna say their name. They were on the track team at FAU. This was when Lane Kiffin first got there, and this was before NIL. And they were talking to me about how Lane Kiffin was what we would consider illegal today under NCAA violations, was doing all these things to get extra money into the program and to get money for players and recruits that were coming in. So it's safe to say Lane Kiffin was ahead of the curve when he was learning how to recruit players, dating back to FAU. But I'm not surprised that Lane Kiffin is an excellent recruiter based on what I've heard about him in his past, specifically at FAU, bringing in numerous amounts of money and promising recruits players different circumstances, different things. And listen, you're paying for the players at this point, and players should be compensated, rightfully so. And that's what the NIL is for. And I don't want to get too deep into NIL right now, because this is, that's not the topic. But there does need to be some sort of regulation for the NIL. It can't just be a free market. And we'll just leave it at that. But listen, Ole Miss did a great job of transfer portal, and if I'm not mistaken, a lot of the players for Ole Miss will be playing in this game. Ole Miss had one of the most explosive offenses in the SEC this past season. We saw what they did against LSU, beating LSU at home. We saw what they did against Missouri. And listen, if we were in the college football playoff version, our ranking, if the new rules are implemented this year, then this would be a college football playoff matchup. And it goes to show what the state of college football is going to be in next year. But listen, these are teams that are built polar opposite. Penn State, extremely physical on the interior, very methodical in their approach offensively, doesn't move the ball offensively quite well. Where Ole Miss likes to spread the field, very explosive with their offense. Their defense is much better as well, a lot better than what people expect it to be or have expected it to be. Specifically their front seven. Their front seven does an amazing job generating pressure, though they do struggle in the secondary. But that's null and void because Penn State isn't vertically explosive down the field, so it doesn't really mean much. Really, Penn State plays right into what Ole Miss does well, which is stopping the run. And I think this game is going to be slow and sluggish in the first half. I think Ole Miss is going to start to pull away once we get into the third quarter. I I do think it'll be a nip and tuck game though, because of the physicality, because of Penn State's defense. But Ole Miss will start to pull away though. I think Ole Miss is going to win this game by a score of 27-23. But I think the game is going to be much more. The score is not going to be an indication of how wide of a margin the game was played at. I think Ole Miss is going to have control over the game, but because of Penn State's, like I said, their defensive prowess and their physicality, they're going to keep themselves in the game. But the 27-23 score isn't going to be as close. It's not going to be an accurate representation of how close the game really was. I think watching the game, you'll realize that, okay, Ole Miss was quite dominant. But like I said, because Penn State is so physically imposing, it'll help keep them in the game. But I don't think it's really going to be as close of a 23-27 game. The score is just going to say that. So that's why I have for this Ole Miss Penn State game, 27-23 Ole Miss, as these two teams ride off into the sunset of next season, wishing that the new rules were in place this year so they could still be playing for a college football playoff championship. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section. What do you guys think about this matchup right here? Do you think it's going to be close? Do you think it's going to be a blowout? Will the SEC or will the Big Ten reign supreme? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. In our next segment, guys, we're going to start covering the college football playoff semifinals. And we're going to start with the Sugar Bowl matchup between Washington and Texas. Perhaps the most exciting college football playoff semifinal matchup we've ever had since its inception. So be sure to stick around for that, guys. You're not going to miss it. We will be right back. Alright, welcome back. In case you missed the first two segments of our show, we discussed the matchups between Georgia and Florida State in the Peach Bowl, as well as the Chick-fil-A Bowl between Penn State and Ole Miss. Both those games are great representations of the direction the college football is moving in quickly, and whether you like it or not, you're going to have to. College football is changing, whether you like it or not, and you're going to have to decide whether you're going to go along with it or you're not, and that's really all it comes down to. But in these next two segments, guys, let's talk about the college football playoff semifinal matchups, and let's start with the Sugar Bowl matchup between number 2 Washington and number 3 Texas. Guys, this matchup is primed to be one of the most exciting matchups in college football semifinal history. When we think back to some of the best matchups, best games in the semifinals since the college football playoffs inception, a couple of games come to mind. One being the Rose Bowl between Georgia and Oklahoma, as well as the Ohio State Alabama semifinal in the Sugar Bowl in 2014, and the Michigan TCU matchup, the Georgia Ohio State matchup from last season, both those games last year in the semifinals. Those are some of the best college football semifinal matchups that we've seen. And this game between Washington and Texas is primed to be right up there in terms of excitement with those other games. Listen, Washington has been subject to a large amount of disrespect, surprisingly, from the media, and from fans. And I don't understand why, because Washington has been one of the most consistent teams all season. Obviously, they're undefeated, champion of the Pac-12, the Pac-12 being the best conference this season in college football. They have a Heisman frontrunner, Michael Penix Jr. You could argue that Michael Penix Jr. is the best quarterback in college football. Washington has in terms of total yardage, the third best offense in college football. Their defense has improved tremendously over the course of the season, particularly on the interior and the physicality they've been able to impose. And Washington knocked off what many thought was one of the best teams in college football in Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. So Washington is much better than people expect, are giving credit for. And the big knock that Washington has been getting all season is their physicality. But like we said, when Washington played Oregon State, we talked about how this is going to be a good test to see how physical Washington truly is, and we saw that Washington is physical. They can line up and go toe to toe with some of the most physical teams in college football, and they did against Oregon. They did against Oregon State. Both those teams are two of the most physical teams in college football. And if we look at Texas has the best win in college football this season, going into Tuscaloosa, defeating Alabama. Texas has one of the best running attacks in college football. They struggle throwing the ball sometimes, especially when Quinn Ewers was out. But Quinn Ewers is back, and he's in rhythm. And we saw what Texas did to Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game. We know that Texas does struggle in the secondary, and with them going up against perhaps the best receiving core in Washington, led by Rome Odunze, it's going to be interesting to see how Steve Sarkisian adjusts his play calling and adjusts his coverage to stop that receiving core at Washington. We know that receiving core or the secondary for Texas has struggled all season in terms of inconsistent play. We know Texas is pretty physical, extremely physical on the interior. They have a good front seven. Will they be able to generate pressure on Michael Penix Jr. in Washington? That is what the big question will be. And will Washington be able to stop the run against Texas? Listen, Washington has a great secondary, amazing secondary. That's the highlight of their defense. While Texas has a great interior, highlight of their defense, which is why I think this is going to be a high-scoring game, because neither team really plays into what the other team does. Both teams will be able to exploit the deficiencies of the other team's defense, which is why I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. I actually have this game going into overtime, and I do think it's going to be a close game throughout. Neither team is going to jump out to any more than a 10-point lead. They're not going. Neither team is going to jump out to any more than a 2-possession game or 1-possession game. 1-possession lead. I'm sorry. And this is going to be an extremely exciting game. The winner of this game is going to win 34-30, and obviously go on to play in the national championship. And Washington is going to win this game. Washington is finally going to show the country on a national stage that they have been the most consistent team, top to bottom, throughout the year, which they have been. And they're going to show the country that they are much more physical than people expect, which they are, and that they have perhaps the best quarterback in college football, which they do, in Michael Penix Jr. And like I said, it's going to be the game's going to be 34-30. Do think Washington is going to win in overtime, and this game will only be a reflection of just how talented both these teams are. Listen, Texas is an extremely talented team. They're moving on into the SEC after this year, and based on what I've seen this year, they will be ready. They are ready. They look like an SEC team right now, and that's why they were able to be so successful in the Big 12 this year, despite them losing to Oklahoma. And it's so strange that loss to Oklahoma shows you what happens when you play rivals in college football. The stats, the rankings, everything just goes out the window when you play your this rivalry weekend, or you're playing your rival, because clearly that Texas is not the Texas that we see now. Though Texas that have about a month stretch where they didn't look as proficient as people thought they were, but that's neither here nor there. They're here now. But I do think Washington, like I said, Washington's has been the most consistent team, top to bottom all year. And I think the physicality that Texas brings, Washington will be able to match with that. And Washington is going to win this game 34-30, and it's going to be an exciting game. This is going to be the most exciting college football playoff semifinal matchup we have seen since its inception in 2014. But let me know what you guys think. What do you guys see happening in this Sugar Bowl matchup? Do you think that Washington will be able to pull off the victory? Do you think Texas will be able to pull off the victory? Do you think it's going to be a close game? Do you think it's going to be a blowout? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section and in the chat room. I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. But in our next and final segment, guys, we're going to be discussing the Rose Bowl, the big daddy of them all, between Alabama and Michigan. So be sure to stick around for that, guys. You are not going to miss it. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back to the final segment of our show. In case you missed the previous segments, we discussed the rest of the New Year's Six Bowl games, the Peach Bowl between Georgia and Florida State, as well as the Chick-fil-A Bowl between Ole Miss and Penn State, and the Sugar Bowl between Washington and Texas. And we're gonna close out this show, guys, with the Rose Bowl, the granddaddy of them all, between number 1 Michigan and number 4 Alabama, the final college football playoff semifinal matchup. And listen, guys, in this, it is interesting. So Vegas currently has, now I checked it yesterday, and it might have changed, but when I last checked, Michigan had the spread barely -2, and that's probably going to change. It's probably going to become a pick'em by game day on the 1st. And it's so interesting that Alabama has consistently and continued to garner the respect of college football. Listen, because if you look at it, Michigan has, in terms of the roster and the players on Michigan have much more experience in the college football playoff than Alabama does. Listen, the players at Michigan have been in the college football playoff for the past 3 years, and like I said, they're undefeated this year. They've been number 1 for the past 3. They're number 1. They won the Big Ten. So they're not new to this. They're used to this sort of environment. And we know that Alabama is a younger team compared to Michigan. We know they didn't make the college football playoff last year, though many argue that they should have. Alabama, we already know. We know Alabama's story. We've covered them all year. They have grown into one of the best teams in college football, has one of the best stories in college football. It's unfortunate because one of their only nationally televised games, or at least games played on a national stage, was against Texas, and for many people that's the only game they saw Alabama play, and that's just not an accurate representation of what Alabama is. I mean, it's night and day, the difference between Alabama then and now. And a large factor of that is because of Jalen Milroe and what Tommy Rees has been able to do for Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe has grown into a productive, an efficient, and a talented quarterback. He has amazing control over the offense, and he can create plays not only in the air but also on the ground. And he's a dual threat quarterback, and a large part of Alabama's success is owed to him, but also to the secondary in Alabama. My goodness, this is perhaps one of the best secondaries in college football, led by Malachi Moore and Kool-Aid McKinstry and Caleb Downs and Artavius Arnold. The names go on, and then there's still Dallas Turner in the front seven. Listen, Alabama's defense has tremendously improved over the course of the season, and it shows. And we saw what they were able to do against Georgia. Alabama had complete control over that game from start to finish, and the offensive line of Alabama has tremendously improved, especially in pass protection, allowing Milroe time to scan the field and make deep throws, which is what he does best. And the offense is extremely explosive for Alabama. This is going to be the most explosive offense that Michigan has faced all season. We're going to see how they'll be able to respond to that. Michigan has not looked as proficient in run blocking these past couple weeks, and the offense hasn't looked as proficient as it did in the beginning of the season. So how will Michigan respond to that sort of intensity in level of play, because this is going to be the best team that Michigan's faced all year. We talked about how Michigan's out-of-conference schedule was weak all year, but Michigan was able to defeat Ohio State. But we know how we feel about Ohio State. Unless Ohio State was not, I thought Ohio State was overrated all season, and we saw what happened in the Cotton Bowl last night against Missouri. Michigan's very similar in terms of their play style, offensively, specifically the pro style approach, to Georgia. And if you know Alabama's history, Alabama plays amazing against teams with a pro style offense that doesn't really spread the field. That's your teams like that play into what Alabama does best. And this matchup is just for Alabama, it's going to be another Georgia game. And so if you watch the Georgia-Alabama game in the SEC championship game, it was slow, it was methodical, but you could tell Alabama controlled the game from start to finish. And I think this game's going to go the same way. I think Alabama's going to control the game from start to finish. And it's going to, because Michigan plays into what Alabama does well. And listen, Nick Saban only has one loss in college football playoff semifinals since its inception, and that was to Ohio State. And every single game, semifinal game that Alabama's played in, has been won by 2 possessions. Like I said, except for that semifinal matchup against Ohio State in 2014. Nick Saban does an amazing job with his teams when he has a month to prepare. And this isn't going to be any different. I think Alabama's going to win this game by a score of 33-26 or 33-23. And it's going to be a slow-paced game. It's going to be a slow-paced game, and Alabama's going to be able to impose their will from start to finish. And that is going to set us up for a matchup between Alabama and Washington for the national championship. So that is my prediction on that, guys. Let me know what you guys think, though. Do you guys think that Alabama is going to win? Do you guys think that Michigan is going to win this game? Do you think it's going to be a blowout, close game? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section and in the chat room as well. But with that being said, guys, that is it for our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a wonderful show. We will be back tomorrow, actually, with another show. We will be previewing some of the NFL games, actually, with our NFL show. But with that being said, guys, like I said, we'll be back again same time tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, guys, continue to stay safe, be vigilant, make smart decisions, and peace.